Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th District. I'm Kerry Condata for NCW Life. Well, a very special show, especially for people that appreciate our U.S. Constitution and the state Constitution. Something I think somewhat magnificent has happened, and it started right here in town with our Sheriff Brian Burnett, who basically went to his association of sheriffs across the state and said, we need to do something to reaffirm our oath, to reaffirm our constitutional duties. And he developed a document that was actually edited a few times by the group, but in essence is still very much like the original. And it basically says, prompted by increasing public concern to safeguard constitutional rights, the elected sheriffs of Washington State soundly reaffirm our sworn oaths to support, obey, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Washington. Well, that's a pretty strong statement, but again, all they're doing is reaffirming what they've already given oath to. In a few minutes, we're going to have Brian Burnett here to talk about this document, how it started, where it comes from, and the fact that 37 out of 39 sheriffs agreed to sign it. It's a big deal. I think it'll be a national news story before it's done. He does say that it started in Utah. They have done something similar, but I suspect it's going to be in a lot of other states as well. People are concerned. I'm concerned. We're all concerned. Crime is rising dramatically, particularly in urban areas. Murders are up. We are setting record after record. And of course, the White House and others are scratching their heads saying, why is this happening? Well, when you take tools away from the police, when you de-escalate, when you defund, this is exactly what's going to happen. And I think that's what prompted this reaffirmation of what the police are here to do. We've got some work to do in this country, but I think this is a good start to get things back on track. We'll be back in a moment with our own sheriff, Brian Burnett, to tell you more about this very important document. Welcome back to the 12th District. Well, we are pleased to have Sheriff Brian Burnett here to talk about this resolution that's getting a lot of press across the state of Washington. I think it could be a national story, frankly. But we want to get a little background on where this started and why it came about. Brian, welcome to the 12th District.
Always good to be here, Kerry.
Good to have you back. You were just with us shortly, but this is a big deal. And I think what's more amazing about it to me than anything is that 37 out of 39 sheriffs signed it, which means you got agreement from that big a group. Now, I've been in politics a long time, and getting 37 people to agree on anything is nearly impossible. So tell me first what prompted the whole idea, and why these sheriffs, latched on so quickly and got on board this thing. There's concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give credit where the credit's due, Kerry. And I read an article. It was back in early June. It was about the 29 elected sheriffs from Utah, and they had done this same thing, wording real similar to this. I actually reached out to the president, one of the sheriffs, and told him that I was interested in writing something similar, and hope they didn't mind if I still, use some of their verbiage, because
Sure.
I really liked the way it read. I think it was important, and I think one of the things that people need to hear is we're just reaffirming our oath that we've already done.
Yeah, you're not breaking new ground
No.
here. I mean, this is basically saying, and that's why I think it's interesting that we haven't seen a lot of pushback. I'm a little surprised, but what could you possibly push back on when all you're doing is reaffirming what you already said?
Right. Well, there will be some people that,
Yeah,
that
well, I
disagree
agree.
with that.
Certainly.
So moving forward, I'm the vice president of the Washington State Sheriff's Association. So I drafted it to fit our members for Washington State, and I sent it off to the board. And said, hey, I'd like to know what you guys' thoughts are. Do you like how this reads? I'd really like to put this out to our members and see if they'd like to sign on and endorse this statement. And one of the main reasons is I had been receiving multiple contacts, concerns about constitutional violations, either whether it's present time or more concerning in the fear of future things that they're seeing coming down from the national level and the state level. Sometimes those are contacts on the street, sometimes those are phone calls, voicemails, calling into our office, social media as well. And so, and then talking to the other sheriffs, it's the exact same thing. This isn't a party line. Our sheriffs represent multiple, political parties: Republican, Democrat, Independent. And so that's not an issue. And you said earlier that getting 39 anybody to do something or agree on something is hard. It's just as hard on the sheriffs, because even though fundamentally we're right there in what we do in our jobs and for our communities, we've had some lively discussions in some of our quarterly sheriffs meetings, and we don't always agree on everything. But boy, this is one that almost unanimously did. Not quite, but mostly unanimously.
Well, I think you bring a good point up that we've said a few times on this show, and that is that we tend to draw these lines between East and West, that the Eastern Washington folks are one way and Western Washington. That's just simply not true. I think these concerns are felt all the way across the state. I think there's just as many, probably more conservative people on the west side, but they just kind of get buried by King County. And it's kind of telling that it's King County that didn't really get involved in this, didn't sign on to it. But that county seems to overshadow the others, and truly they're a lot more like us than we think. Would you agree with that?
No doubt about that. Mm-hmm. And so, I would challenge people to say, are you telling me you don't want to support the Constitution and the oath that you've already sworn? And I would go to the King County Sheriff and say that most likely, more likely than not, that wouldn't be the case with her. I think that she would want to support the Constitution, and most likely does. I think there was some concern on her part whether or not it was the timing, and what would this be confrontational and breaking down the relationship that we had with our legislators. And I'll tell you right now, after what we experienced this year, we already said that's gone. That's already happened. So if we don't stand our ground now, and really again, this is about the people. This isn't so much about the sheriffs as in general as the people. And when we hear their concern, is just to go out and reassure them, calm their fears, to say, no, we're paying attention, we're watching, and really you're not going to stand alone if this happens.
Well, this document really covers not only the Constitution of the United States, but the state constitution, which actually has some stronger language in some areas. One in particular is the Second Amendment. The state constitution actually is even more profound than the national constitution. And I noticed that you made that kind of a highlight of this document. You could literally highlight the first and the fourth and all the other ones we're concerned about, but you did bring up the second. Is that because that seems to be the largest concern, or is that just in general the foundation for this document?
Yeah, absolutely. That's always been the largest concern. That's the thing that we hear the most from people. And some of the negative feedback that we've had, I would say as I'm sure other sheriffs have experienced this as well, but speaking directly for myself, is that people have said, well, why not the First Amendment? Why not the 14th? Well, obviously the Constitution is covering them all, but we specifically brought up the Second Amendment because that is the one that people are most concerned about, and always have been, I would say.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and again, something I brought up in the legislature a lot, that, in this particular district, I suspect there's as many weapons, as much ammunition as any district in the state of Washington. People here do tend to like their weapons and their guns, and for good reason. They are very patriotic. But yet we don't have any gun violence to speak of, not in the kind that they've seen in Seattle and Portland and other places. And there's some connection there. I mean, people don't break into homes around here because they know that a lot of them are armed. I think that's part of it. Would you tend to agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think there's statistics around the nation that prove that some of the most heavily areas for gun registration or just, what the word I'm looking for there, but let's take Chicago, for instance.
Yeah.
Some of the strictest gun legislation and rules that they have around the nation, yet they have one of the most violent homicide rates that there is. And so,
absolutely, and Washington, D.C. was the same way a few years back. And it is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that gun control, at least the type that you're hearing about, does not really function. It's not the weapons, and we know this. It's not the weapons that kill people, it's people that kill people, right? So I could see why people are concerned, especially with the rhetoric coming out of Washington, D.C. and out of our own legislature. Now, speaking of our own legislature, they did some pretty wild and crazy things to you guys this year. We're going to get more specific on that next week with your Sergeant Frank, who says really an expert on this, to tell us more specifically what your concerns are. But the overall picture is we're taking tools away from the police to enforce the laws, and we're seeing that reaction by crime going up, especially in these largely urban areas, and murders going up, and all the statistics are going the wrong way.
Right, and really, this really falls right on the heels of the de-escalation movement. And I'm going to speak specifically to Washington State back when they passed Initiative 940. And I played a pretty big role with that as being a commissioner for the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And we were in basically hearing testimony from victim advocate groups saying why we needed to do this, this, and this. And some different things got laid out there. And as soon as they put these de-escalation things in place and we started this new training, which was good training, by the way, it was expensive because there isn't any funding for it that comes back to the local agencies. But one of the big things from that is then on the heels of all of that, they turn right around and they write this, and I'm going to say poor policy. You know, I'm not going to attack the legislators personally. They may have really thought that this was good stuff, but I'm going to tell you, I think it's a big failure, Kerry, and I think, I hope we're all wrong, and that everybody out there just continues to obey the law and crime and violent crimes don't go up. But based on what we know, that's probably not going to be the case, and that's what we're very concerned about. And so some of this legislation, and we'll take an example of they restricted 50 caliber weapons for law enforcement. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure who would be using those in the first place. But now that has translated into 12 gauge. Well, we only just use 12 gauge shotgun for slugs and buckshot rounds as a lethal weapon, but we also use those for what we call less than lethal. So beanbag rounds, maybe pepper balls and different things like that. And so you're going to see across the board here in the state that most agencies are probably going to pull those weapons and put them on hold until we can get an actual ruling on that. We shouldn't need a ruling because I don't believe that if you take your own interpretation of it, this is what it's going to say. But now you've removed a de-escalation tool, and then there's many, many more examples from canines to,
the vehicles, the
things.
military vehicles, I found fascinating because there is no offensive capability in these military vehicles. They're really defensive mechanisms to get your officers closer to the scene of a problem and to protect them while they're trying to defuse. And yet they want to get rid of that as well. And it seems to me that's just going as backwards as you can go.
Right. And time is one of the biggest things we have. And in our patrol tactics training, which is new escalation training, one of the instructors asked our class, and this is the one that I attended, is time on your side? And of course most people say yes, time is on our side, and we've been taught that in law enforcement. And then he totally breaks it down. He says no, time's not on anybody's side. Time is neutral. And so we have to utilize the resources we have and the tactics that we have to put those all together and use them to the best of our ability to make a situation that resolves for everybody's best outcome. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do. But when you start to take tools away out of the toolbox that we have taken years and years and years to create and build up programs within our local law enforcement agencies, it's very disheartening and it's frustrating because now you look forward and say, well, how do I now safely get and respond our men and women into these calls so we can protect the citizens when these calls come up? Because we're not forcing these calls. These are calls that are coming in as 911 emergency calls.
Yeah. We're going to take a quick break and come back with Sheriff Brian Burnett. I want to break down what kind of started this whole defund movement. It's got a lot to do with race, at least the overtones are racial, but yet we live in a neighborhood that is 30% minority. You'd think if there was a problem, it would be here. We'll be right back with Sheriff Brian Burnett. All right, we're back with Sheriff Brian Burnett. We're going to dig into a little bit more depth here on the background of why this defund movement and all these issues started. It kind of comes down to race. That seems to be the underlying issue here, that minorities are treated differently, and possibly that's happened in certain cases. But in this community, we've had a 30% minority community since I've been here, almost 30 years now. And I haven't seen those issues here. You're the sheriff, you do it. Is there a racial overtone? Is there a racial issue in this area in Chelan County?
Boy, Kerry, I really don't think so. And again, I started my law enforcement career back in around 1997. Spent a little time in the jail and then went to the field in 1999. But I can't say that it's going to have to be very, very isolated cases. I would say more than anything, we see it from public members or isolated cases like that, but not very much. Again, I'm not going to speak about other parts of the country because I don't
Right.
live and work there, and we're not
Yep.
going to claim to do that. But we're talking about what we have here, and I really think we have a community that looks at people as human beings and says we're going to treat them fairly. We've been teaching that and training that ever since I got into law enforcement, and it says it's non-biased policing.
Right. That's been around a long time. That's
A very long
nothing new.
time, absolutely.
Well, and that's the concern, and it looks to me like, again, and we see this so often in the legislature, that the Seattle portion of the legislature tends to control things. They have become the largest part of the Democrat caucus, and these are issues that they seem to want to deal with, but one size doesn't fit all. And I think that comes back to this resolution. Your sheriffs are saying, why are we going there? I don't think there's a problem in Tri-Cities. I don't think there's a problem here. I don't think there's a problem in the peninsula. Is it all Seattle-centric? I mean, is this really where it's coming from?
Obviously, that's the thing that's going on here is specifically trying to narrow down and say, okay, we had a problem here, or someone says there is a problem, and they may have had some isolated problems. But let's look at the picture in whole. And I always kind of look at it like if something goes wrong with my car, and it's carburetor or fuel injection or something in the drivetrain, am I going to gut the entire car? Or
Right.
sell or scrap the car and buy a new car, buy a boat because a car no longer works. So let's drive a boat in the water. I say no. I said let's find out is what's wrong with it, and then let's go back in and let's fix that moving forward. And in law enforcement, we always go back and debrief. We're going to debrief a scenario and say what worked good and what did not. Did we put people at safety at harm, both the citizens and our officers? And then that's a learning moment, so we can say, one, we're going to do the critical lessons, learn what we shouldn't do, and how we can fix that, and make that scenario better when we respond to that type of case in the future.
Yeah, I think you're constantly adjusting, constantly making changes. Like you said, you've developed these tools over a period of time that have allowed you to diffuse situations more effectively, more timely, and with less aggressiveness. I mean, it seems to me that there are people out there that think police want to shoot their guns, that want to be the wild cowboy types, and that's just not the case. I don't see it. I don't think your guys wanted to, use that gun unless they absolutely have to, I would assume.
Right, and one of the things I want to be careful with, and I've seen this a little bit coming back from the Criminal Justice Training Commission, is they're leaning towards, hey, we think we need to do this training. And we're like, wait a second, time out. We already do 700 plus hours of training. Are you going to increase the academy time? And if so, how are you going to fund that? If you're not going to increase the time, you're going to have to cut something out and replace it. So what are you going to cut out and replace it? And so we're always saying there's certain things that need to be taught in part of the culture of each local municipality or county for that policing agency. And I think it's important to say we want to decide as a community what we want that to look like. We don't want the state to decide that.
Right.
We want you to teach us, the tactics and patrol procedures and criminal law, maybe some report writing and some different things like that are very, very important to the basic law enforcement academy, because that's why it's basic. And then allow your team at home to train and mentor those people into what you believe you want them. We push servant leadership here big time for the Chelan County Sheriff's Office, and what that means is we put others before self. And it's a simple thing is if I'm going to go in and I'm going to be dealing with a family or an individual in a crisis scenario, or even just on a traffic stop, I would say treat that person like you would want them treating your son or daughter or your spouse. Mm-hmm. And that's how we should be looking at that. Regardless, they might be a suspect and they might have done something fairly horrendous, but they still have these humanistic rights in the way that we should be treating them. And if we teach that in the culture and the training portion of where we are here locally, I think it's going to say a hard time to do. We need to dismantle that and start over because somebody did something wrong over here.
Well, you got a completely different scenario here too. You do things that people in King County don't do. I mean, maybe they do on the outskirts, but you've got wilderness areas involved
Yes.
here. You've got search and rescue. You've got cases that are out in the middle of nowhere. This is a completely different scenario, and so the rules have to be different, the way you do things. I think the biggest concern for a lot of us as citizens is, and I know the people in Seattle are getting worried, is being able to attract police officers to do this job. I mean, if you continue to make it harder and harder to do, to enforce the law, and you make it more dangerous, I think that's what this does to me. you're not going to be able to attract good people. I mean, Seattle's got a problem right now. They can't get people down there.
Right, and just in the last few years, recruiting has really changed in how we go about that. We're having to rethink that. How do we find the best candidates? One, how do we even get the numbers so we can choose, find out who the best candidates are?
Yeah.
But defund police, I think you're going to see a whole different thing from the legislation, what they passed here and what this has done to impact the current local or law enforcement officers that are already in the field versus those who are coming up and considering the profession, or maybe even those who are in the academy. I think you'll see dropouts in the academy. I think you'll see people that were in the process of testing for agencies that will pull their name and say, boy, I don't know if I want to do this. I'm doing the risk analysis and it doesn't look very favorable to me. And then now you're going to see people that are, boy, I'm a year or so out from retirement, and maybe I would have liked to have worked another 5 or 6 years to get my retirement up to this level. Maybe it's just not worth it anymore. And I think it could be very destructive to our local workforce. And even so that I think what you saw in the defund police was more isolated to specific agencies, more larger cities.
Yeah.
This is having a encompassing all across the state impact to our agencies.
Absolutely. Well, we're running out of time, Brian, but circling back to this document, I think it's pretty amazing to get that many people in agreements, and I think it's also wonderful from citizen standpoint to see this because we're starting to feel real vulnerable. We're starting to be worried. And this really puts it back in place. So I salute you for doing this. I think it's a marvelous document. It's simple, it's straightforward. And I think you're going to be talking to an awful lot of people over the next week or two. And you've started something. And I suspect other states will do the same.
Well, I'd like to see that, and I think more than anything is again, I'll tell this wasn't a popularity contest.
Mm-hmm.
We've been accused of, you must be up for election this year, or you got bigger aspirations, or whatever. That's not the case, and we really do care. I know these sheriffs, and we may not agree on everything, but one thing I'm confident is they care about their communities, they want to do what's right, and so they're hearing the voices, and that's what they're responding to say, yes, we're there for you, we believe in the Constitution. And this is what some people have a hard time remembering, and it's basic, I would say, Constitution 101 in my book, and it has to be because I'm not that smart of a guy. But the Constitution is not subject to the law. The law should be subject to the Constitution. And I think that's what we're trying to say. If everybody could remember that, I definitely think we got a better future. If they don't, then we'll see what it brings.
Trouble ahead. All right, thanks for being with
right.
us today. Really appreciate it. All right, next week we're going to have part 2. We're going to talk to Sergeant Frank about the specifics of what they can and can't do under the new laws, which mostly will be kicking in about the time you see that show. So we will be right back to wrap it up. This is the 12th District. Welcome back. Well, there you have it. The declaration has been made by 37 sheriffs to uphold the Constitution of the state and the United States. I think that's a great start. It does have some highlighting on the Second Amendment, which is a large concern for many people in this area, and should be. But more or less, it's a line in the sand as well to say enough's enough. Next week, we're going to have Sergeant Frank here to talk about specifically what the legislature did in this session to basically defang or de-escalate the police and take away a lot of the enforcement tools that have been very successful, developed over many years. So we'll look forward to seeing you all next week for part 2 of this adventure. And Sergeant Frank telling us exactly what they're most concerned about as these new rules go into effect on July 25th. That's it for today from the 12th District. I'm Kerry Condata for NCW Life TV. Don't forget our news at 5, 6, and 10 o'clock. That's local news right here from Wenatchee. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next week.